Sotah Daf Vav. We begin a few lines into the Daf. We bring one more source for the halacha that a Sotah cannot do Yibum. The Gemara will bring the source, and we'll have two attempts to discredit the source, because if that source is true, you should have two other halachas which aren't correct, and the Gemara will answer them both. Then we get to our second Mishnah. For the Masechta, the Mishnah will discuss when a woman is disqualified from Tumah. Then the Gemara will get into a whole new sugya, which will have a proof from that Mishnah, and that is the sugya of if there are witnesses that a woman became Tameya somewhere in the other end of the world, do the Mayim Hamorim, do the Sotah water work on her or not? So let's begin. We've been discussing the source that a Sotah is not allowed to do Yibum. So the Gemara now brings another source. We've brought one, the Gemara now brings another one. This is a Kal V'chomer that Rava brings. Rava says if she becomes usher to that which was mutter to her, she should certainly be usher to that which is us to her. Meaning to say that if by becoming a Sotah she becomes usher to her husband who was permitted to her, she should certainly be usher to her husband's brother who was usher to her husband's brother was usher as an Isser Ach. She should certainly become usher to him as well. And she should not, the Isser that applies to her husband should apply to her Yavam as well. So the Gemara has a kasha on this. The Gemara says if that's true, then you should say the same thing in a similar scenario. What's that? If you have a Kohen Gadol that's married to an Almana, so the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry an Almana, so there's an Isser there. So she is Usser to him. So if she's Usser to him, she should certainly be Usser to his brother by the same logic. Now, the brother, she would otherwise be allowed to marry, besides for the halacha of him being her brother, even though he's a Kohen, because an Amon is allowed to marry a Kohen, a regular Kohen. It's only also to a Kohen, a Gadol. But we should say the same thing. If she's also to her husband, she should be also to his brother. So the Gemara says, what kind of logic is that? She didn't become also to her husband. She was always also to her husband. The logic that I said was if she was the one who she was mutter to, she became usher, certainly that isser should apply to the one she was usher to. But here she was never mutter to her husband that she became usher to him. It doesn't apply at all. So Abai therefore says, okay, I'll change the case slightly. I'll change my kasha. I'm not talking about a Kohen Gadol, I'm talking about a Kohen Hedyot. And we're talking about where the Kohen Hedyot was married to his wife when she was mutter to him. And then she was nenas. She became the victim of a rape, and there were witnesses, and therefore she becomes usher to her husband. So there, your kasha you said before is not going to work here, because she was mutter to her husband, then she became usher. So she should certainly be usher to his brother. Now, obviously, we have to be talking about where the brother is not a regular Kohen, because then she'd be usher to him as a woman who was raped as well. So it's got to be what we're talking about where the brother was a chalal. So if the brother was a chalal, we should say the same logic. She should be usher to him, because if she became usher to her husband, who she's mutter to, she should be usher to her brother-in-law, who she was usher to. So again, Rava rejects that, because Rava says no, because the isser that applies to her husband does not apply to the brother. There is no such isser as a woman who is nenas on a chal. Chal is like Yisrael. There is no isser b'chal. So that is not relevant to her, and therefore that is why that logic doesn't work at all. However, in the case of the woman who becomes a Sotah, she's also the Baal, and therefore she should apply to the Yavam as well. Okay, now we begin the next Mishnah. This Mishnah discusses when a woman is a Sotah, she is usher to eat truma, and the only way she can become mutter to eat truma is if we resolve the concern against her. That is, we determine her true status, and the way to do that is by drinking the water. Any woman who refuses to drink the water or can't drink the water because the water doesn't work for her remains usher to eat truma forever, even if she's married to a Kohen or she goes back to her father's house and he was a Kohen. So these are those circumstances. And one is if she admits, she says she's Tameya, okay, so she's going to stay usher. The next one is if she has witnesses that say that she is Tameya, so that's established. Then you can have one who says, I don't want to drink. I'm not admitting anything, but I refuse to drink. She doesn't have to drink if she doesn't want to. However, it doesn't resolve her status, and therefore she remains usher to her husband, and she also remains usher to have truma. Another situation very similar is if her husband says, I don't want her to drink. I'm not going to obligate the drinking. Then she can't drink either. And again, she remains in the state of Isser because she cannot determine it. And the last case is if her husband had bia with her on the way, after he did Kini Astira, and they're on the way to the Sanhedrin to do the drinking, then he was forbidden to be with her, and if he was with her, then now the water's ruined. He won't be able to use the water to check her status because he's violated that, and therefore she remains also to her truma because water isn't going to work on her at all. Okay, now the Gemara goes into a different sugya. It's the halacha of Rav Sheshes, and the Gemara is going to have a lot of discussion, including a proof from Rav Mishnah on Rav Sheshes' halacha. So Rav Amram quotes Rav Sheshes' halacha. Says Rav Sheshes taught us halacha, and he brought a proof to it from Rav Mishnah. The halacha is, what if you have a sotah, a woman who's on her way to, who went to Kinoi and Stira, she's on her way to the Beis HaMikdash to drink the sotah water, and there are witnesses elsewhere on the planet that could testify that she really was Tameya, that she really violated the Isser. Will the sotah water work on her or not? And obviously, if there are Edom which can testify and establish to the court here in Sanhedrin that she's Tameya, the sotah water is not going to work. But is that because the Edom exist or because the Edom testified? And the difference will be our case where the Edom exist, but they can't testify because they're not here. So will the sotah water work or not? So that is Rav Sheshes' the question that Rav Sheshes is discussing, and he says no. The sotah water is not going to work, and he gives a source for it. Later in the Gemara will have a different source. He gives a source here. It says, because the pasuk says, "V'nistra v'hina tma v'eid ein ba." The only way the sotah water works is if there are no witnesses. However, that if there are witnesses somewhere out there, then you can't say eid ein ba, because there are witnesses, they're just not here, and therefore the sotah water is not going to work on her. Says the Gemara, there's a proof to that from our Mishnah. Where do you see the proof from our Mishnah? Because the Mishnah says that if witnesses came and said that she's Tameya, then the sotah water is not going to drink. So let's analyze this. When did these witnesses come exactly? They came before she drank the sotah water. Why would the Mishnah need to teach me that? She's never going to drink the sotah water. There's nothing to talk about. She's an established zona with testimony. Of course, she's usher to have truma, so it's not referring to that. What must it be referring to? Where the witnesses came after she drank the water, and the witnesses said, even though she drank the water and she's still alive, the water had no effect on her, we're testifying that she's a sotah anyway. Now, I don't understand. Why would we believe them? The sotah water checked her, and the sotah water established that she's okay. Nothing happened to her. Obviously, the witnesses are lying. So why would we believe them? Why would our Mishnah say that we believe them and she's usher to truma the rest of her life? Obviously, it must be that because these witnesses existed, the sotah water wouldn't work. So if they come and they say, we existed while she was drinking, we existed before, we knew about it, but we just weren't here, and now we showed up. So we're telling you, no way the sotah water didn't work, because we were out there, we were witnesses out there, and really she's Tameya. Oh, so if my halacha is right, this is the only way to understand why we would believe the witnesses, because we have an explanation for why the sotah water didn't work on her. So that is the proof from our Mishnah. Says Rav Yosef is not a proof, because I'll tell you there's a different reason that the sotah water didn't work, and therefore there's no proof from the sotah water, the fact that she survived, that these witnesses are lying. Because there's another situation in which the water doesn't work, which we haven't mentioned yet. And that's what's called the yesh l'schos, if she has a merit. And there's a brisa later which discusses if she has some merit, some mitzvah, some zechus, that will postpone the sotah water having an effect on her. It'll have effect on her eventually. And there's a machlokas later, which we'll see soon, what that effect is and how that effect takes place. But eventually she's going to suffer the effects of the sotah water, but that could be years from now. So if we're talking in a couple of days, weeks, and months after she drank the sotah water, witnesses came and they say she's Tameya, they may very well be telling the truth, and the sotah water is going to affect her soon. It just hasn't affected her yet because she has this schus, because she has the merit. So we have here machlokes between Rav Yosef and Rav Sheshes. If there are witnesses at the other end of the world, would that have an effect on her or not? And we also have a machlokes, which is, is there a possibility that there's another explanation for why she hasn't been affected? Says Gemara, that seems to be that it's dependent on a three-way machlokes tanaim, which we're going to learn later, as to what happens if a woman has a schus. Over there we saw that Rabbi Shimon's opinion is that it won't help her. She's going to have the same effect right away, and we'll discuss Rabbi Shimon's opinion soon. Rebbe and the Rabbanan do have a machlokes that's a bit smaller. They both agree that it's going to eventually affect her. At some point, she will have the same death as the sotah. It'll take time, though. The question is, will she have some effects right away? According to Rebbe, she's not going to have any effects right away. The question is, what did the Rabbanan hold? Will there be some effects right away, or will there won't be any effects right away? So Rav Yosef, who holds that it's possible that we'll believe these witnesses who say that she is clean because nothing happened, that might be because she has a schus, we would say they might not be lying just because of a schos that they hold that the Rabbanan, so Rav Yosef holds that the Rabbanan hold, then nothing will happen to her. However, if Sheshes holds something has to happen to her, then the Rabbanan disagree with Rebbe. Rebbe holds nothing will happen to her, but the Rabbanan disagree, and the Rabbanan hold something's going to happen to her right away. She starts kind of like wasting away. So therefore, he says that can't be a valid explanation for us to explain why nothing happened to her, and therefore, if the witnesses aren't a valid explanation, then we should establish that the witnesses are lying. This obviously proves that the witnesses themselves existing suspends and makes it that the water isn't going to work. So there again, you have the machlokas of Yosef and of Sheshes is dependent on, is she going to start wasting away right away if she has this chos, or is she going to be fine until it finally affects her? Another one wants to bring another proof against Rav Sheshes. Again, Rav Sheshes' halacha is that if there are witnesses somewhere on the planet, she won't be affected by the Sotah water. And this proof is from Rav Shimon's opinion. So Rav Shimon says she has to be affected right away. There's no such thing as a zechus that delays or holds off the effect on her. And the reason Rav Shimon says is because you can't have a situation where the water doesn't work. You know why? Because first of all, women won't be afraid of the Sotah water at all, and that's bad. We don't want that. Also, there won't be any established merit. You cannot establish that she's clean because nothing happened, because people could keep saying, oh, don't worry, maybe she just had a schos and something's going to happen soon, you'll see. So therefore it's impossible that you have a situation where the Sotah water doesn't work yet, but it's going to work soon. Now, says the Gemara, Rav Shimon should be able to say the same thing about there being witnesses at the other end of the world. If Rav Sheshes is right that also cancels the Sotah water, makes it doesn't work, so you should have the same argument. People won't be afraid of the Sotah water because they'll see situations in which it doesn't work, even though they know she's Tmeya. And people will also say the fact that nothing happened doesn't prove anything, because it could be that nothing happened because there are witnesses that she's Tamei, and the witnesses just haven't come yet. The witnesses are somewhere else. So therefore, you can show that Rav Shimon must not hold to this halacha. So the Gemara says, you're right, Rav Shimon doesn't hold to this. Rav Sheshes was not saying this in Rav Shimon's opinion. Rav Shimon most certainly holds that this is not going to work. Rav Sheshes was saying this in Rebbe and the Rabbanan, not in Rav Shimon's opinion at all. All right, now the Gemara asks another kasha on Rav Sheshes, and this is from the karbonos of the Sotah. The Sotah has to bring a carbon mincha, and when the mincha is canceled, it has to be burned. The halacha is that once it's niskadesh in a kli, it's put in a kli sharis, it gets kedusha. If something goes wrong at that point and she's disqualified from drinking, then you have to burn the carbon mincha. It doesn't get brought on the mizbeach. You don't do the kmitza, you don't do any of the avodas, it gets destroyed. If, however, the mincha was never niskadesh, then it goes to chulin and it's fine. The flour, the oil could be used. There's no issue with that mincha. So we have a statement. Rav brings a brisa which says these are the karbanos that have to be, these are the karbanos mincha that have to be destroyed. That's if she admits that she's tmeya after the carbon mincha is already put in the kli sharis, so now the water's not going to work, so the mincha doesn't get brought, it has to be destroyed. Or if witnesses come and say that she is tmeya, and therefore it has to be destroyed because she cannot bring that carbon, because the water isn't going to work, so the mincha isn't going to work. So now the Gemara makes the following cheshbon. At what point did these witnesses come? If they came before you put the carbon mincha in the kli, then the mincha is chulin. There's no issue, right? It was never an eskadesh, and it's fine. So that can't be what we're referring to. So we must be referring to after the carbon mincha was already put in the kli. If the carbon, so the explanation then is the carbon mincha is already put in the kli. It's already an eskadesh. Witnesses come and they say that she was Tameya, and therefore the water isn't going to work anymore. So therefore you can't bring the carbon. You have to throw the carbon out. Says Gemara, hold on a second. If you say that the water was never going to work as long as the witnesses existed, so that means that this carbon mincha was already disqualified as long as even when it was before it was put in the kli. So being put in the kli sharis should never be mekadeshed because it was never roy to be ever brought, because she could never drink the Sotah water because witnesses exist somewhere in the world. Obviously, then, the fact that it is niskadesh and it doesn't get thrown out shows that even though witnesses exist, she still could have brought the Sotah water at that point, and therefore it's a kasha on Rav Sheshes. So the Gemara says, no, we'll give a couple of answers, a few explanations as to how it could make sense. So first we have Rav Yehuda of Diskarta. He says what happened is that she was actually mizana after the mincha was put in the kli. The mincha was put in the kli at that time, it was roy. she could have drank the water no problem. The witnesses did not exist yet because she wasn't Mizana yet. She was later Mizana afterwards, before you could bring the korban and mincha. She was Mizana then, and witnesses saw that and they came. So says Zimmer, hold on a second. That means she was in the Azara the whole time, because you put the korban mincha, you take it from her and put it in the kli while she's in the Azara. So she's in the Azara, she was Mizana there. How's that possible? She's brought around. She's always guarded by the young kahanim, the pirchei kahuna. So the Gemara says, okay, that's not a problem. Either she was Mizana with the pirchei kahuna, or like Rashi says, that she went to the bathroom. They don't follow her into the bathroom. They don't hang on her yarmulke. They don't hang on her tichel, as they say. And therefore, it could be that she escaped. Now, says Rav Papa, I'll give you a different explanation for how this kli sharis, why this korban mincha has to be burnt. He says it really could be that she was mizana before. I asked Akasha this mincha's chulin because it was never qualified, because it could never be brought. The answer is that it's gzeira d'Rabbanan. The Rabbanan were afraid that if you're going to allow something that was put into a kli sharis to then go to chulin, people aren't going to understand that the reason is that it was never really qualified, it was never really supposed to be brought all along. They'll see, you took a kli sharis, you took mincha out of a kli sharis, and you made it chulin. People learn from there, wrong halacha. So therefore, the Rabbanan made gzeira. Anything that goes in the kli sharis has to be burnt. So the fact that it's being burnt is being burnt midrabanan, not midraisa, because it's really not in a skadesh. So on that, the Gemara has a kasha. Rav Mari says, but I have a case where I could show you that did not make such a gzeira, and they did let something go from the kli sharis to chulin. So we see this in a lengthy brisa that discusses if something disqualifying happens to the korban mincha at any stage of its processing. So if it became tamei before it was put in the kli sharis, then it's like any korban mincha, it could be redeemed. It's chulin. It was never in the skadesh. It could be redeemed. You have to take off the kedushas hadamim, but it could be redeemed. Now, if it was already in the skadesh and the kli sharis, it's like every mincha, it has to be burnt. If you already took off the kaimitz, which is equivalent to the shchita in a korban mincha, and it gets a special kedusha, then, but it was not put on the mizbeach until the wife or the husband, until they died, then it's like any korban mincha, which is not going to be brought. It's already in the skadesh, and it has to be burnt. It has to be destroyed. If the kaimitz was brought and the kahanim didn't get a chance to eat the rest of it, which is like eating a korban of an animal, and then he died or she died, then it is like any korban mincha, and it can be eaten. There's no problem with it. It's right, and the reason is because the whole korban mincha came to take her out of her safek tumah, and now she's out of her safek tumah. The safek is gone. She died already. We know that there's no issues anymore that have to be established. Now there's the last case, and this is our focus. What if witnesses came that she was timeya? Then the korban mincha is burned. This is our case. But if those witnesses were then found to be zomimin, then, and the korban mincha is still around, then it goes to chulin. So the Gemara says, I don't understand, why does it go to chulin? You just told me that once it's in the kli sharis, it can never go to chulin. Obviously, you see that it's not true. There's no gzeira d'Rabbanan. So Gemara says, no. This is very different. When Edom zomimin happened, it's very well known. The Rabbanan didn't have to make a gzeira in a case like that. It's so well known that people will understand that halacha. However, in a stam case, they did make a gzeira. Gemara ends off this discussion with a brisa that says the same as Rav Sheshes, but for a different reason. He agrees with Rav Sheshes that if there are witnesses at the end of the world that the water is not going to drink, but it has a different makar. Rav Sheshes had a drasha from a pasuk. This brisa has a different drasha. So the word tahira, it says that it's only going to work if she's tahira. Tahira is to exclude if there are witnesses that in Medina Siyam that she is not. Tahira also excludes if she has a zechus. Vitahira excludes if she has a zechus. It says the extra vav, and then it says he, the extra word he, referring to her. That's for someone who everyone knows. Those who are busy weaving by the moonlight and chattering know that she's tameya. She's also excluded. That's another example of someone that the water's not going to work. So now the Gemara says this brisa doesn't fit with Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon held that any situation that it's not going to work is a problem because people are going to be mitzi shemra on the women who came out clean. So the vav of vitahira, he could argue, he says he doesn't have that drasha, and therefore that which we said that a zechus is not going to help her, and Rabbi Shimon said it can't because it'll make lashon hara on those who are tahorim. He doesn't dash on that vav. The Gemara says though, but the pasuk clearly says if she has edim in Medina Sayam, it's not going to work. Why does Rabbi Shimon not say the same concern that those who came out clean are going to look bad? So the Gemara answers, since they're lo shliach, that's not a concern. It doesn't happen often, and therefore not worried about that. And he would agree to this halacha that the ones in Medina Hayam, if they're edim in Medina Hayam, it's not going to work, then the waters won't check either way. But since it doesn't happen often, there's no Moitzi Shema, there's no laz on those who the water purified and said as pure. People aren't going to say, oh, it's because there are witnesses somewhere else, although if they'll say it, it doesn't happen often enough. So that it doesn't happen often enough for them to say it.